Right into the economic collapse financial news. Now, the deep state, the corrupt politicians, the private Western Central Bank, the World Economic Forum, they are continually trying to convince us that the economy is doing very well. At the same time, the economy is completely and utterly falling apart. And you can see the two things happening at the same time. On one side, you have the internals of the economy. They're all pointing to a recession. I do believe we're already in a recession. And then on the other side, what do you have? You have the Biden administration, the central bank. They're all trying to convince everyone that, look at our numbers. Everything is fantastic. Everything's going well. Don't worry about anything. And the economy's great. So you have both sides happening at the same exact time as we head towards the presidential election. Now, as we get closer and closer to the presidential election, we know that the Biden administration, they're going to continually push the idea that everything is great. The Fed is going to do the same exact thing. They're already building the narrative for the rate cut and why it's not politicized. So you can see that they're already putting this out there. They already want everyone to believe this. But when you look at the other side, you can see everything's falling apart. Companies are laying off. Real estate is imploding on itself. Inflation is going to pick up. Fuel prices are going to go back up. Remember, they've been brought down a little bit by manipulation. They've been brought down by releasing the strategic petroleum reserves. And soon, what's going to happen is this little Band-Aid fix, it's going to completely break. And all of a sudden, you're going to see things start to move up. But again, they're going to continually try to tell everyone that everything is fantastic. So when you look at like Germany, for example, Deutsche Bahn, they're planning to cut 30,000 jobs after 1.2 billion in losses in the year's first 6 months. And when you start to look around the world and you start to look at all these different corporations, you can see that they're just laying more and more people off as time goes on. And when you look at many different countries, you can see that their economies are completely imploding, even though they're telling you that, hey, everything is great. We're going to be lowering the rates, just like Canada. They had 2 rate cuts. But when you look at Canada, Canada is absolutely awful. Wall Street Silver on X put this out and said, Canada had the worst growth out of 50 developed economies since 2019. While prices soar to where a full-time job can't pay the bills, housing is astronomically expensive, out of reach of nearly 80% of Canadians. Trudeau led a government takeover of the Canadian economy. Soviet policies get Soviet outcomes. And that's absolutely true. And when you look at Canada, even though they're cutting the rates, inflation is off the charts. People can't find jobs. Everything's falling apart, and it doesn't look too good. But when you look here in the United States, what do you see? Well, you see the real estate market, that is starting to fall apart, and it's starting to look very, very similar to 2008, 2009. Copisi Letter on X put this out and said, new home inventory in the southern U.S. is officially above 2007 levels at 293,000, according to Reventure. In fact, 65% of all new homes for sale are currently listed in the South, primarily in Texas and Florida. This is exactly why new homes are now selling for less than existing homes for the first time since 2005. When people are paying more for old homes, you know something is broken. 1 out of every 3 homes for sale in the U.S. right now is in new construction, all while there are a whopping 274,000 new homes under construction. Price cuts are coming soon, absolutely. And when you look at the home builders, it's not any better. And if you notice, it's looking very, very similar to 2007, 2008, 2009. For example, home builders now have 102,000 completed and unsold homes for sale on the market, the highest since 2009. This comes at a time when the mortgage demand is at its lowest level in nearly 30 years. Meanwhile, there are a whopping 274,000 new homes under construction. This is just approximately 62,000 less homes under construction than the peak before the 2008 financial crisis. New home supply is skyrocketing in a market where mortgage demand is plummeting. A record of 1 out of 3 homes for sale right now is in new construction. We could see there are major, major problems right now. And when you look at people with their credit cards, when you look at people paying their mortgages, you could see we're in trouble there. Copisi Letter on X once again. Early credit card delinquencies for low-income households spiked to 4%, the highest level since 2011. Early delinquencies have quadrupled in just 2 years, as credit card debt and interest rates are at a record high, and prices are still rising. How long can consumers hold on here? Absolutely. So here we have the economy completely and utterly falling apart, mirroring 2008, 2009. And when you look at what the Biden administration is saying, And when you look at the manipulated numbers, what are they telling you? They're telling you that everything is great. They're telling you that the economy is improving. Right now, from the manipulated numbers, the U.S. economy grew at an annual pace of 2.8% in the second quarter, much faster than 2% forecasted by Wall Street analysts. The stronger than expected growth indicates that the economy has continued to expand despite high interest rates, calling into question the need for a rate cut from the Federal Reserve in the near term. The first quarter of this year, growth slowed to 1.4% after rapidly growing in the second half of 2023. And we know what they do here. We know that they continually manipulate the numbers, they revise the numbers to make you think that something's happening when it's not. And remember, if you're telling the Federal Reserve, listen, the economy's doing great, look at our GDP numbers, look at the inflation numbers, look at consumer spending, look at what we have here, you could tell that everything is fine, so you could start cutting the rate because the economy's doing well. And when you manipulate inflation with releasing fuel onto the market, this way bringing the fuel prices down, which then in turn brings inflation down, everything then is manipulated because that is just a Band-Aid fix and you're dealing with manipulated data. If you're dealing with manipulated data, how can the economy be doing well? And this is where everything's going to start to fall apart. And this is when you're going to see the Fed say, okay, we got the word from the Biden administration. You can see how they're going to set this up where they're going to blame the Biden administration. They have been telling us from the government numbers that everything looks good. And we're looking at inflation that's coming down. And they will use that. Now, of course, what they'll do is because they don't want to take the blame, they'll just turn around and blame it on the Biden administration. They always have a way out. Plus, I do believe there's going to be some type of cyber attack in this country. And to explain away why everything is completely and utterly falling apart, they'll just blame it on that and say, hey, it hit our financial system. Just like we had the CrowdStrike outages. All of a sudden, everything went out and people couldn't get money. You couldn't transact business with banks. Airlines were hit. So I do believe they're going to take that and move that to the next level. And this is how they're going to explain everything away when everything starts to completely and utterly fall apart. But what they're doing right now is they're prepping their narrative. And this is coming from the fake news. And you can see they're already trying to build up why it's okay for the Fed to cut the rates while we're in a presidential election. The Federal Reserve appears to be on track to cut its benchmark interest rates in September, just 2 months ahead of the general election in November. According to conventional wisdom, a rate cut could boost the economy and encourage voters to reward the incumbent political party. Fed officials value the central bank's independence and avoid stepping into political matters or favoring either party. The risk of being accused of favoritism hasn't stopped the Fed from election season rate cuts in the past when economic conditions warrant them. Policymakers at the Federal Reserve try to avoid politics at all costs, but the central bank is widely expected to cut interest rates ahead of this November presidential election, a move that risks causing backlash. The trajectory of the economy has set the Fed on a collision course with the general election and possibly with former President Trump, the Republican candidate in the 2024 race. Investors and economists expect the Fed to cut its benchmark interest rates by September. So they're already preparing the narrative. They're telling the people that, hey, it's okay if they do this. It's for the good of the economy. And it just so happened that everything's coming together at this very moment while we're having the presidential election. I mean, really think about this for a second. Think about how all of this has been planned and how all of this is coming together at the right moment in time. When was the last time you saw anything like this, where all of a sudden the Fed is planning to cut the rates exactly 2 months before the presidential election? When they said that most likely they might not be able to cut rates this year. Actually, in the beginning of the year, they told us it was going to be 6 rate cuts. And then all of a sudden they said, oh, no, not 6 rate cuts, 3, 2, maybe none this year. And what happened was the Biden administration, they kept manipulating the data. They kept manipulating inflation by releasing fuel onto the market, and they remove certain things in the inflation calculation, like coffee. So they remove things to make it look really, really good. And they did this on purpose because this was planned from the very, very beginning, because they knew that the economy was crashing. They know the economy's not doing well, and they need everyone to believe that while the economy's falling apart, everything is fine. This happened in 2008, 2009. We said this many, many times before. While the Republicans were in office, McCain was running, Obama was running against him. The Republicans at the time, they said the economy's great. Everything's fine. The Fed even came out and said everything is great. Everything is fine. And Bernanke at the time was saying, we're not even predicting a recession anytime soon. Now, of course, the recession and the market came down in the same exact year that he said this. So when you look at the parallels, you can see the same things happening right now. This time around, we have the Democrats telling us that everything is fine. The Fed telling us everything is improving. They haven't come out and said they're not projecting a recession, but I believe we're already in a recession because it's a lot worse than 2008, 2009. And we can see that we're heading towards the same exact collision course. And I do believe as we get closer to the presidential election, with everything that's taking place right now and how they're preparing all this, they believe they're going to have the upper hand. They believe by cutting the rate, it's going to show the people that the economy is doing fantastically well and everything that they've done worked. But I do believe what's going to happen is it's going to backfire on them. I do believe that the economy is then going to start to fall apart. It might look great and shiny in the very, very beginning, leading up to that point, and especially when they just cut the rate. It's not going to just fall apart as soon as they cut the rate. But when you look at Canada, you can see everything's falling apart up in Canada, even though they're cutting the rates. But here, I think this is going to put the economy over the edge because, once again, the economy already went over the edge. The Fed is just following up on this by cutting the rate. Now, if you look back in history, you can see how they did this. They raised the rate, they raised the rate, they raised the rate, it plateaued. And then what happens is the economy tips over. And then as it's tipping over and the internals, which people really don't pay attention to, they just look at the stock market. They just hear what's on the news and they hear everything's great. The internals, though, where everything's falling apart, where companies are starting to lay off, 5,000 here, 30,000 there, 10,000 here. No one really pays attention except for those people that are losing their job. And the internals really start to fall apart and everything starts to basically come together. And eventually what happens is everything's falling apart. And the Fed at that point says, well, we're not going to be blamed for this. So we're going to cut the rates and it's going to look like we've done our job. Everything is great. We can always turn it around, blame it on the administration saying they gave us fake numbers. They can always turn around and blame it on some type of an event. And we've been at this plateau where the Fed hasn't really raised the rates or dropped the rates. And now everything's going to start to come down. And I do believe this is exactly what we're going to see. Everything's going to start to implode on itself. And as we get into October, I think this is when everything starts to really fall apart. And once the market comes down, this will be the signal that there's something wrong with the economy. At this point, I don't believe that the Biden administration, the Fed, they're going to be able to get out of this. So as everything starts to fall apart, everyone's going to be staring at the Biden administration. This is not going to help them in the elections, especially now that Biden is out of there and they brought someone else in. Because again, whoever they bring in, they're a part of this administration. This is not going to help them in the long run. And again, this is all going to backfire on them because they're going to build it up quite a bit. Trump, on the other hand, he's going to let everyone know, look, I told you, we're heading into a recession. R is the nice word for it. Everything looks pretty bad. And I told you it was going to look bad, but don't worry, we can fix it. We can take what we have today and we can turn this around. And all you got to do is you got to elect me. You got to elect me because once I'm elected, then we can drill. We can remove the Green New Scam. We can place tariffs on China. We can place tariffs on other countries. That will basically bring a lot of the manufacturers and companies back to this country. And we can turn this country around very, very quickly. And I do believe with the event, most likely he will go after the Federal Reserve. Because again, we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve. If we don't get rid of the Federal Reserve, this is just going to happen again. Because again, this breeds corruption. It breeds everything that we see today. And without doing this, and if we're still borrowing currency with interest attached, we just run into the same exact problem. So I do believe the main goal here is to bring us back to the Constitution, bring us back to sound money. And I do believe this is where all this is headed. And when this is all done, I do believe the central bank will cease to exist. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thank you.